So thanks guys for coming today. We're going to be talking about building skills for virtual reference, and you both know us, but we're going to introduce ourselves anyways. I'm Lindsay Warden, and I'm the Extended Campus and Distance Services Librarian.
And I'm Emily Mann, and I'm the Research and Information Services Librarian.
And we co-coordinate the virtual reference service. So part of this is, of course, creating the schedule and reading over transcripts, but it's also offering a series of training sessions to make sure all of the people who staff our virtual reference service are always improving, thinking about their skills, and learning new things. So if you ever have ideas for training or you feel like there's somewhere that you'd like to grow more, me and Emily would love to hear about that, and we would always love to learn more about what the staffers want and what you need to be successful. So today in the session, we're going to start out and talk a little bit about our statistics from this fall semester, and they're actually really awesome, so it's going to be a little bit of a brag time. And then we're going to talk about some basics to remember, so really going back to what we discussed in earlier trainings about virtual reference best practices and how to have a good reference interview. We're going to also have a bit of discussion talking about virtual reference and emotional intelligence, and that will be based off the readings and the videos that Emily provided you. And then we're going to talk about how you can actually connect the ideas of emotional intelligence and use them in your virtual reference interactions to have a more fulfilling interaction and give the patron a more sort of empathetic sort of support. And then I'm actually going to conclude the training today talking about some maybe new best practices and new ideas for how to improve your chats. So I pulled these statistics. These are just from the fall, and I did monthly, daily, and then hourly, and then I compared this fall to last fall. And so if we're just looking at monthly statistics, August is really low because we didn't start the semester until the 29th. But as you can see, we had killer months, especially in September and October. In December, we'd only been around less than 2 weeks, and we still got that many chats. So October was our busiest month, sort of middle of the semester, which is really interesting. But as you can see, we've done a really great job in having a lot of chats, as you can see over on the left side. And here are the daily statistics for this fall. So our busiest times are Mondays, with Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are pretty busy as well, and then it falls off Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I doubt this is really surprising to anyone. But you can see that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is where we're getting all of our interactions and all of our chats almost. So here we have the hourly statistics, and then this is, of course, like an average throughout the semester. And so our busiest times, it starts to pick up around 10 a.m., and then at noon is when we have the most chats, and that lasts for early afternoon, and it sort of drops off around 4 and 5. But you can see that even later in the evening hours, we're still getting a pretty significant amount of chats. So especially if you're staffing later at night, that's going to be a really busy time, and I'm sure, Jesse, you know that. So here's my favorite chart that I have created, because it's actually looking at fall 2015 as compared to fall 2016. And so the garnet is the statistics that we had in fall 2015, and the gold is from just past semester. And as you can see, we have had enormous, super significant growth in our chats and the amount of chats that we're getting. I did the math, which was hard, and we had a 71% increase in chats. It went from around 1,200 to almost 2,000. I mean, that is a super, super significant increase. And I think there's a lot of things that we could say of why this happened. Probably the way the chat box is featured on the new web page helped. I think we've done a great job of sort of marketing the service as well. But I also think it has a lot to do with our level of service. And people are happy, they're coming back, they're chatting more. And so this is really a congratulations and a thank you to you guys for being great at staffing the service. So I kind of wanted just to start out with some basics to remember. Things we've talked about before, things that will always be important in our virtual reference interactions. And so first is the greeting and the follow-up. We've talked a lot how important the greetings are, just creating sort of a dialogue, making sure that you're friendly, you're welcoming, you're open, and thinking of each interaction as a reference interview. So instead of just thinking about it as a chat, I'm really trying to give that person a voice, thinking about the reference interview basics, which Emily is going to go over, and every time you chat with someone, even if it's like 30 seconds, trying to make sure it's full and important. And always keeping in mind the principles of customer service. So that's really about, that our users, our students, they're customers. And it's about how to give them the best sort of experience. So I'm sure that we've all probably used chat services with Amazon or different vendors in different ways, and thinking about the best practices from those sort of chats and how we can use those for the library and for research support. And always thinking about your tone. That's going to be really important, being friendly. Things can always be misconstrued when it's text or chat, so thinking about giving that person a voice, so it's more like you're talking to a person, and always thinking about your voice as well and how your words can be taken. And lastly, giving your full attention. I think that when we have an in-person reference interaction, we're never going to be distracted on our computers, not talking to the patron. But when you're chatting with someone, it may be easier to sort of be distracted doing something else, maybe even talking to someone in person, working on something else. And instead, I'm really going to ask all of us, whenever you're on chat or you're chatting with someone, give that your full attention, give it the same sort of attention you would give to an in-person user.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Hopefully. Lindsay, could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. It looks like Teresa and everyone can hear me too. So thank you so much for that first part, Lindsay. And I want to say something that I heard recently and I really liked when I asked someone about their customer service philosophy. They said, show your baggage at the doors. And I think that's a great kind of philosophy. And it goes really well with the emotional intelligence stuff that we're going to talk about a little bit later, because being aware of how you're feeling and then thinking about if that's going to affect the way you're going to be talking with people. So all of that stuff that Lindsay was just talking about really ties into the emotional intelligence part of this. So that's why we really wanted y'all to kind of read some of those or watch some of those videos. So anyway, the reference interview, as we have talked about many times before, is I've got two different versions of the reference interview. This is the first kind of like the nuts and bolts of it. It always starts with a welcome, and the welcome kind of lives everywhere, and then you gather information, confirm the exact question, give the answer, follow up, and then it goes back to gather the information. And I do that because sometimes you might not actually have given the correct answer. That's why the follow-up is so incredibly important. So all of those steps are really important, and most of those steps can really use emotional intelligence, particularly the confirming the exact question, follow-up, gathering information. Really all of them can use that emotional intelligence part. And then, of course, we have the RUSA guidelines, and we'll go back to these in just a few minutes, but they are, of course, approachability, which is harder in virtual reference, interest, listening inquiry, searching, and follow-up. So these are all things that are important to have as a part of your reference interview. And, yeah, like I said, we'll talk about the emotional intelligence part of it in the next couple of slides. But first, I think, Lindsay, were you going to talk about self-assessment?
Yeah, I'll talk about self-assessment first. And this is something that we've also talked about in our trainings before, how because virtual reference is such a different experience than doing in-person reference, one of the most successful ways that you can improve and sort of is to look at your interactions objectively and to always self-assess your interactions, your chats. And so my first suggestions about self-assessment is to go back and read through your chat sometime. I know none of us have like a ton of time to just like read through our own chats, but this is actually a really useful exercise. And read through your colleagues' chats too. You know, I think that it would be really interesting to see how other people are answering questions. It's always just nice, you know, if you know how to use lib apps and use libchat, the statistics, looking up transcripts is actually really easy, and I'm sure it's something Emily would be happy to show you, or I could show you as well. And so I just like came up with these questions, some really basic questions as you're reading through your chats or your colleagues' chats that you can ask yourself. Did you answer the question correctly? Did you give the right answer? I think that's going to be one of the most important things, and maybe if you're busy or you have a couple of chats, you may answer kind of haphazardly, but always like assess, like, did I give the correct answer to that question? And did you answer the question in a timely manner? It's all about being efficient. People use chat because they want a really fast and easy way to talk to a librarian. So were you timely in your response? Was the user satisfied with your answer? This can be hard to answer in virtual reference, but look for clues. I mean, did they say thank you? Did they say nice things? Did they seem relieved or happy? I think that there are sort of like cues you can take to see whether the user was satisfied. And lastly, were you satisfied with the interaction? You know, when you have a really good like reference interview and you walk away all sort of warm and fuzzy feeling, did you get that feeling? Did you sort of feel like, oh, I could have done that better, I could have been a little nicer, a little more timely in my responses? In virtual reference, as in any reference, you are going to get questions that you don't know the answer to. FSU Libraries is a massive system with tons of things that I don't know about, and so I get questions all the time that I'm not sure about what to do. And we talked a little bit here about how you can always, you know, refer them to a subject librarian or try and say you'll follow up with a different answer. But if you do get a tough question or you're seeing these tough questions come up over and over and again, I would suggest go and add it to our FAQs and add it to the knowledge base if you do find the right answer. Because a lot of times when I have a tough question, that's one of the first places I'll go. Always look for the teaching moments. And this is something I thought about a lot. Is sort of me and Emily were discussing what readings we thought were important to this training and sort of looking over the literature, talking about specific virtual reference. And I think that thinking about reference as teaching is a really sort of beautiful and interesting thing and a new thing. But for us working in a university environment, those teaching moments where you have the chance to have an interaction and sort of teach a patron something new, teach them how to do something, that's really what's special about virtual reference, and you should always be looking for those teaching moments. And then I just sort of ended it with a fluffy, happy, always improving, always growing, always learning. You know, we should always be trying to be better at virtual reference. I just showed you how much our numbers are growing, and that means we're doing an amazing job, and it's like really an amazing service. People around campus love it. But we should always try to improve what we're doing and always be learning how we can be better at virtual reference.
Thanks, Lindsay. So now we'd like to kind of get to the discussion over some of the readings and the videos that we provided you with. I know that everyone didn't have a chance to look at everything, and we didn't expect you to, but if y'all got a chance to look at some of the videos or read some of the articles, these are just some discussion questions that we came up with, but we'd also love to hear you guys had any particular thoughts on anything. So since it seems like no one has a microphone, I will go ahead and just read out the first question, and we can start from there. And just type in the chat box, and we'll go from there. So after reading or watching information about emotional intelligence and virtual reference, do you see a connection? And if you do, why? And if you don't, why not? So we'll give you guys a couple seconds to go ahead and type some stuff in. So Teresa says it makes perfect sense. The more emotionally intelligent we are, the easier it is to connect to our patrons. And I would agree with that. Yeah, how to deal with patron interaction.
I also very much agree with that. I think that part of the reasons why librarians are successful and why reference will always be a thing is because people do want that personal connection with the librarian. When they're asking for help, that's like a very personal thing that you do. And so being able to, properly manage that sort of relationship and think about always like empathy, I think is really important.
And I think that emotional connection is sort of one of the reasons people do ask a librarian. I mean, they can Google things a lot of the times now, how to do research, but they come to us because they do want that connection. And so making sure that we're aware of that they might be having different sorts of feelings. They might be coming at us with a positive attitude. They might be coming with us with a I'm freaked out attitude. But I think that the more emotionally intelligent we are, the better we are going to be at providing virtual reference. And I think you can see from our virtual reference numbers, we've gone up so much. And I agree with Lindsay. I think part of that is placement and things, but I think it's also that people feel like they're getting that connection. And Teresa says they want people who are trained in finding the information and will understand how difficult even basic research is and won't laugh at them for not knowing how to do it. I think that's so right. One of the things I'm always telling people who work at the physical reference desk is we're not there to judge them if the paper's due the next day. Great. Did anyone have any other thoughts on this question?
I also, just as I suppose it's also pretty important when you're assisting a patron who is not happy.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that, and I think that's something that you deal with a lot in trying to navigate, that sort of emotional. Yeah, and they've hit a brick wall a lot. Yeah, people are really, a lot of times you get people when they're really frustrated. And so how do you handle that and, de-escalate the situation as well?
Yeah, and so emotional intelligence can make such a difference with that, because if you come at them and you're giving them all the correct information, if you're not thinking about how they might be perceiving that and what their emotions are, you can completely fail at the transaction, because it's not only about the information, but making them feel better. So that's completely right. So after looking at these, does anyone feel like they have a high or a low EQ? Lindsay, do you think you have a high EQ or a low EQ?
I think I have a pretty high EQ. And
you have a high one?
Yeah, and I think that it's something that it's probably hard to really judge how high your EQ is, but this is something like I've always super cared about. And I have always been about trying to connect with people and vibe with people. And ever since I first started working in libraries, that was a place that I felt like I really tried, and I really tried to grow there.
Excellent. Teresa, you say that you feel kind of low. I agree. I feel like I have sort of a low EQ as well. And so I hope that it's something I can be trained in and that I can learn. And I think it is. I think just from reading some of the different emotionally intelligent articles, I feel like just thinking about that helps me to look at it from a different lens. So even if I don't naturally just intuit people's emotions, I can definitely learn to stop and think about what the emotional feeling is going on with people. Medium. I like that, Sandra. That's a good answer, too. So then the next, I think it's something I can learn, but it kind of in spurts. Yeah, I agree with that, Teresa. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I also think it is something that you can learn and you can get training for it, but I think that it's like also dependent on your personality. Maybe so it's almost like a twofold thing. You can grow as much to a certain extent, but it is dependent on your personality and who you are too. Yeah,
I think probably my emotional intelligence, I think Lindsay is kind of an emotionally intelligent person, so maybe mine's not going to be quite that high ever, but at least I can, work on it. So, and you have to like people in general. I like some people. They're all right. What are the emotions that you assume your patrons are feeling? So in general, how do you guys feel that your patrons come to you? Do you think they're in a good emotional state? Why do you think that? And then the second part of that question is, how can you address that? So if you think people are coming to you like after they've hit that brick wall, how can you address that in a positive manner through virtual reference using higher emotional intelligence? Confusion, frustration, seeking professional answers.
I always think that they feel overwhelmed too, and that they're, you know, when you're doing research and you don't know how to use a database, and then you're like, well, the library has hundreds of databases and millions of books. It's like, what? That's almost too much, you know. And so they're looking for guidance in a way.
I think they come up to me confused a lot of the time, as well as overwhelmed, like confused even to a point of what the virtual reference service is. Like they're not only needing to learn how to use the library, but sometimes they come to that get help box and they just type in like their topic, like they aren't aware we're people on the other end. So I feel like that puts them at sort of like it can put you at a defensive state because you thought you were just like going into like this neutral like Google box and then there's a person talking to you. So how do you think we can address these feelings of overwhelmed, being overwhelmed or frustrated or confused? So I'm looking at Teresa's answer. I usually tell them that we can narrow down options or ask about search terms they've used. They seem to get focused on a few things instead of 20th century wars. They believe we're all trained librarians and give them the best answers or referrals. So Sandra, it sounds like you feel like they come in expecting the best from us. So that can honestly, if we're emotionally intelligent about that and we feel like we're reading a lot of confidence in them, that might give us more confidence as well. Okay, so I think that was a good discussion. Well, but you're coming to these trainings, and I think, you know, that helps to get you to the place where you need to be. And we hope you're not too freaked out. So this is the last question, unless you guys had anything that you guys wanted to bring up. But based on what you read or watched, do you feel like these things can help you improve your virtual reference skills? Do you feel like you're on a continuum of learning? Oh, yeah, it is. Thanks for putting that out, Teresa. We'll fix that on the next slideshow.
I think since we've been talking about emotional intelligence and really talking about it, I've been thinking about how I can better connect with patrons through any sort of like online communication forum, especially when you don't know the person, and how to make them feel more welcome. And so for me, I think that it's using different language, being more conversational, trying not to use jargon, trying to always be super friendly too, and really like interested in what they're saying. But I think it's really thinking about your words and also trying to mirror what the patron is, like how they're talking and how they're saying.
Yeah, personalizing your responses, that's great, Jess. I like reading other people's transcripts and mirroring. I'm reading two different things. Reading other people's transcripts is great because especially if you feel concerned about your EQ, maybe look at how other people are doing things and see Oh, that really makes sense to me. That appeals to how I would want to be taught to, and so thinking about how you can do that. Personalizing your responses, and at the same time mirroring what the patron's feeling. I think those are great answers. Well, thank you guys for being part of that discussion. Do you guys have anything else that the reading or watching brought up for you? And we do appreciate you doing a little bit of homework before. Okay, well, I'm going to go to the next slide then. So let's talk a little bit about emotional intelligence. I'm going to be looking at the Marin-Solovey model, and there's 4 branches or abilities within that, and that is perceiving emotion, so being able to really perceive emotion, the ability to identify, distinguish, and express emotions, and that can include within other people and also within yourself. Being self-aware of your own emotions is kind of a huge part of emotional intelligence. If you are going into it and you're frustrated because you answered the same question 4 times, maybe take a minute and think, am I showing that I'm frustrated? Because we don't want that to come through in our language. Again, with virtual reference, we really lose a lot of the different senses, the body language, the tone of voice, any of that. All we're getting is what's being written. So we have to think about how it could be perceived on the other end as well. Then we have using emotion. So that's the ability to generate emotions in oneself and in others. And again, it's easier to generate emotions in yourself. They say you can pick up a phone and smile and try smiling when you talk, and it might make you come across as friendlier. But it can be harder to generate emotions in others. So again, thinking about how your language can generate emotions in others. Are you using language that could be considered hostile and could put them on the defensive, especially if they came at you in a kind of state of confusion in the first place? Understanding emotions, so knowledge of emotions, as well as the ability to predict how your emotional state will evolve as situations change. So even if someone's coming at you and it seems like their emotional state is kind of confused or maybe even frustrated because they've been, they've hit that brick wall, thinking about what you can predict how their situation, how their emotional state will change as the situation changes. And you say, oh, I'm so sorry that that is happening. Let me see if we can find some solutions for you. And as they find the solutions, their emotional state's probably going to evolve as well. And then managing emotions, and that's regulating both your own and others' emotions. So once you've got them happy, keeping them happy. And they sound kind of similar, but using emotions, generating them is a little bit different than actually managing the ones that are there. We definitely have to generate some emotions. Okay, I'm going to see what Teresa said. I'm not good at predicting what emotions I'm generating in others and managing others' emotions. That's why I think I have a low EQ. So that's where you just kind of, I think it's about learning to read their language and thinking about what emotions they might be portraying through that language. But yeah, it's really difficult, especially in virtual reference. Maybe someone's less comfortable with, thanks Sandra, we'll see you to the next one. Maybe someone's less comfortable with typing, and so maybe they're perfectly happy, but they're just using very short sentences. So thinking about the different situations. So advantages of being emotionally intelligent and just even thinking about your emotional intelligence as you're doing stuff. It promotes creative and flexible thinking, and I think that's really important when you're in virtual reference because you're going to need to be able to be a flexible thinker. It's important for reference in general. When we're trying to figure out what the actual problem is, I don't know how many of you have had this problem, I'm sure all of you, when someone comes to you and asks one question, but they really want something completely different, where they say, do you have newspapers, and really they want articles about panda bears, but they didn't know that articles come in journals as well as newspapers. So being creative and having flexible thinking is an excellent thing when you're doing virtual reference. Being able to understand complex questions, again, that's something we're going to need to be able to do when we're doing virtual reference. When people are involved, emotions are involved. People are involved in virtual reference. That's one of the greatest things about virtual reference is it's not a computer, it's not find it on your own, but it's actually getting a human involved, and both you and the patron on the other end. So using emotional intelligence in VR means a better experience for both you and the patron. Being self-aware of emotions can help you be aware of how you might be perceived. So if you're aware of how you're feeling, you can make sure that if you're feeling great, make sure that's being perceived, but if you're feeling like you're not having the best day or you're angry, think about how you're going to speak. And that's the best part about virtual references. You have that filter between you, so you don't have to just throw out whatever's going on. It gives you a moment to really think about how you're presenting yourself. And then it also helps you to communicate more fully when you're emotionally intelligent. And of course we want to communicate fully. That's one of the hardest parts about VR. So VR is really a multi-layered skill set. You have to be able to do reference. You have to know how to use the technology. You have to be providing customer service, and you have to be able to communicate really well. So you're trying to do all four of those things all at one time. And that can be a lot to ask of one person. And then sometimes you're answering questions you don't even know the answers to on top of it. So effective communication is so essential for VR. And as we saw on that last slide, emotional intelligence, EQ stands for emotional intelligence because it's EQ and IQ. That can help us to provide the effective communication. So how can we connect EQ to the RUSA guidelines? So approachability. How can we involve emotional intelligence with approachability?
I think approachability is one of the most important guidelines when talking about EQ. And I agree with Teresa, having a really enthusiastic greeting, having that greeting and sort of trying to transmit your excitement, your willingness to help as soon as you start talking to the patron.
Yeah, that's that causing emotions right there, managing emotions and generating emotions. Just being hello and putting that exclamation at the end, that generates that emotion of feeling kind of accepted, right? So interest, I think, is in some way the same. What about listening and inquiry? And again, we can think about the perceiving emotions, using emotions, understanding emotions, or managing emotions.
I think for listening, perceiving the emotions is really important. And Teresa said using a lot of rewording, do I understand, to make sure that they're understanding you guys are on the same page, trying to find a connection, even in just understanding the issue or the question.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think it's really about understanding the emotions and figuring out how their emotions might evolve as the situation changes, and as part of that, listening and inquiry. Searching, again, that's really where you're doing the searching, but what about follow-up? Is emotional intelligence involved in follow-up? Sorry, Teresa, I feel like the heavy lifting's fallen on you. Well, I would say follow-up is, again, part of that creating, generating emotions, and regulating emotions, keeping things really friendly. Is there anything else I can help you with today? That helps people to regulate their emotions, continue to feel like they're being heard and that they're important to us. Yeah, great. So, Teresa, I'm even seeing I'm seeing some different kinds of statements than I always see in your chats, and I think that's great. I think that's showing you really kind of reading into that emotional intelligence and thinking about how it can work with that. That's awesome. So I'm going to give you a couple statements, and I want you to tell me how you would approach those statements with emotional intelligence. And even if that's just, how would you perceive the emotion coming through, and how might you try and manage that emotion? So this first statement, why do you need to know if this is for a class? So what kind of emotion can you perceive from this?
Defensive. I think it's a little bit of a defensive statement the way I read it.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah, I see it as defensive as well. So probably you weren't meaning to make them defensive, so how could you manage that emotion in a positive way? Not saying, don't get all defensive. Yeah, so just being sure to give the information of why you're asking the questions you're asking. Sometimes we ask, are you a student because do you have access to different materials? So just making sure that they're clear on, different classes, different kinds of info. Making sure that they're understanding why you are sending the information you're sending, or asking the questions you're asking. Great. All right, so what emotions can you perceive from, are you single, I'm lonely? And how could you use emotions within this to try and regulate this kind of statement?
I've seen like a lot of this before, and I always think that I can't tell whether they're joking or whether they're serious. And so I think that it's hard to know how to handle this sort of thing. Yeah, see, and Teresa said kind of sarcastic, and that's the thing. But then again, if we're really being emotional intelligent, it could be somebody who's very sincere and lonely, and so thinking about that too.
Yeah, so this is a hard one. Like, that's how do we understand the emotion, and so how do we then kind of manage that emotion? So is that the kind of question that we dignify, or is that where we say, look, this isn't the correct forum for this question, and we're showing that our emotional state right there is really more professional than we're not here to be your girlfriend. I'm not sure about my topic. What do you think I should do? So how would you perceive this? Lost, yeah. So they're feeling confused. And so if we understand that they're confused, how can we, we can say, what is this for? We can kind of guide it. And so we can guide by the question. So, So the point of those is to just really think about the fact that they're not just asking the question, but they're kind of giving you an inner view of how they're feeling right at that moment. So use that emotion, figure out where they are, and figure out how you can help them to get to the emotion of happy and satisfied patron. So I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay now.
Great discussion about EQ. I think that's really important. I think it's really interesting. And especially, me and Emily have been talking about doing a training focusing on emotional intelligence for a while. And this is something that's really risen in importance in all sort of reference interviews, and especially in library work and all sort of higher education work. I'm thinking about emotional intelligence and sort of how we can better connect with our users. So I think it's really important for something for all our staffers to grow on, and I think that it will mean much better chats too. So I started out talking about remember the basics. Let's talk about what we've talked about before, but I have some new things, some new sort of maybe best practices And of course, best practices is a fluid idea. It's something that I hope we all can take part of and think together. And what works for one person may not work for somebody else. But here are some suggestions based on the research and based on some of my thoughts lately. And my number one is use less canned chats. I have decided I do not like canned chats. In certain cases, especially the one talking about databases that you use that are very technical and that you use often, it makes sense. But I don't think you should use a canned chat for grading anymore. I think that customized canned chats, Jess, I think that could be much better. And I think if you create your own voice and make it more personal to you, and you can go in and customize canned chats. And yeah, I usually can't get to them as quickly as typing. And so that's the thing. First of all, I know that they're convenient in some cases, but I also think that part of what's special about why people go to librarians, why they do come to us instead of going to Google, is because they want that personalized experience. And I think that actually canned chats make it more we sound like robots, you know? And so I think that, not that they're never useful, but think about how you could use less and how maybe you could have more of a voice, make it a more conversational experience if you don't use as many canned chats.
And I would say to Jess's customized canned chats, I think that's great because it's in your voice, and so you can continue with your voice. And you already know how it's going to come across because it's using your particular voice.
Completely agreed. And my second point is really thinking about listening and empathy. So I went to this Internet Librarian Conference a couple months ago, and the number one thing I got out of that conference was there was so much talk about what is the future of libraries, what is the trends, what is going to happen with libraries, and people were talking about VR and talking about, well, that's actual virtual reality, not virtual reference, but talking about how everything's becoming more automated, and robots are going to take over more and more jobs. And I thought about, what is the one thing a robot, a virtual computer can never replicate, and it's the empathy. And it's the empathy of librarians, the empathy of our staff. And that's what makes us great. That's what will always make us relevant in this environment. And so really thinking about listening, true listening, deep listening. You know, we talk about like deep thinking. I think that a lot of times we listen very sort of surface level, but really thinking about emotional intelligence, sort of perceiving emotions and having that deeper listening and that deeper empathy for our users. This one is pick up questions in 25 seconds or less. It's actually noted in the article I sent. It's one of the virtual reference ones. It's in the reading list. And so that is the new customer service standard for all chat customer service. And I thought it was really interesting. I wanted to include it. Obviously, it's a goal, and it's not something we're always going to be able to do. I know a lot of times when you are moderating the chat, you are probably doing other things, and 25 seconds is not a lot of time. But always sort of keep that in your head and make that your goal, because they've done research about it in the customer service landscape, and that's when it's a patron's mood who's waiting on a chat starts to shift. So take patrons from where they've been searching, the known, to better sources, the unknown. And this, instead of just throwing a patron into something that they're completely unfamiliar about, start with what they know. Maybe they have only searched for Google. They have only used Google Internet sources. Start talking about good Internet sources. Then move to what a good Internet online source is as compared to a scholarly source. So I always try and do this. I always try and teach people on a curve. And this also is obviously tied to the last point as well, which is get to know your patron, especially in terms of their searching expertise. So I ask a lot of questions about where people are, how familiar they are about the library. Have they used the library before? Have they used the library database before? If the answer is no, I'm going to give a much different response than if they are familiar with using a database but having some issues. Say they've never used ILL before as compared to they're very familiar with they're just having an issue. You need to know that about your patron, I believe, to have a successful reference interview. So think about how you can enhance their experience, and based on what they know, based on what level they are, but always be very cognizant of where they are in their searching and where they are sort of on what they want as well. So for conclusion and final discussion, just a couple of points. As our numbers continue to rise, as I expect they will, I completely expect to see those numbers keep going up, and I'm very proud to see that. We must continue to improve our service and support the diverse needs of our patrons. You know, FSU is about to have new programs. We're trying to grow. We're trying to have new students, have more international students, have more online students. That means that these users' needs are going to continue to be different, things we've never seen before, and so there's going to be a lot of really interesting ways that we can support patrons at all. And so also recognize, enhance your emotional intelligence. Think about these points. Think about this discussion. This is something me and Emily really like to talk about, so if you want to have another discussion about emotional intelligence, how you can use that not just in virtual reference, but in all of your professional library duties, you know, we can all do a better job at all those points that Emily discussed. And for me, always practicing empathy and remembering that's why we're here. We're working in libraries. We want to help people. We want to support people. When people are coming and asking for help, that's a really beautiful thing, and it should be something that we respect instead of ever feeling annoyed or frustrated, even if their question is a little, you know, maybe something that we think, well, that doesn't really seem like it's worth our time. But the truth is that us having the empathy we need to make our students successful is what is always going to bring students back to using the library, back to using library resources, feeling comfortable talking to library staff and librarians. So I always want to keep that in mind, and we have some time, obviously, so me and Emily really wanted to open up. If you have any questions about anything we talked about or anything about virtual reference, this is sort of a time for discussion for the next 10 or so minutes.
Well, it looks like we don't have too many questions or more discussion, but as Lindsay said, we are always available by email or Skype or Slack or any of that. So we hope that you'll think about these things, and Jeff knows where to find me. We hope you'll think about these things in the future, and if you want more information on any of this, we'll be happy to provide you with more resources. So thank you guys both so much for taking part in this, and yeah, it's so hard to find a good video. I'm glad. Thanks for watching it. At least the videos are. It's hard to find good librarian videos. We are librarians, not videographers. Yeah. So there, you used your emotional intelligence right in it. Thanks, Teresa.
Already doing a great job. Let's
see, you're already improving that emotional
already improving. I like that too. And I that's the same thing, and this is something I also think is important, but to not talking down to our patrons, always treating them as equals, and that's really important to me too. So thinking about that as well, creating that environment. But if you want to see the training again, I'll be live in person next Thursday, just in case you didn't get enough this time. So, yay! All right, well, thanks for coming, guys. I think it was a good time.
Yeah, thank you so much.